Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. In today's episode, we are going to be tackling the question, what do I do if my high school senior is not letting me read their college application essay? Now, I know that is a question that either if you're a parent of a high school senior, you might be struggling with now, or if you're the parent of a younger student, might not even know that this might be something you might be struggling with in the future. However, the reason I wanted to tackle this particular question today is because every school year, every application cycle, multiple parents come to me with this exact same dilemma. So this is why I invited our guest today, Erin Taylor. So Erin is a guest of the show, and you might remember she was a guest of ours a couple episodes back. So Erin Taylor is a parent coach, a certified parent coach through the Parent Coaching Institute. She is a motivational speaker, host of the Powerful Parenting for Today's Kids podcast, an author, and a mother of four. Erin was able to take the tragedy of the death of her infant daughter and turn it around, using her hard-earned wisdom to help people from all walks of life step into their power and live their best lives. So Erin is here today to help us kind of think through, what do we do if we are reaching this sort of resistance with students, and to better understand maybe where it may be coming from. So Erin, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks, Mary Grace. I am super excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, same here, because I have received emails from parents. I have had conversations with parents who are frustrated, high school senior parents of high school students who are frustrated because it's a very stressful time in general to apply to college, and most parents, right, are wanting to support their children as they're going through such a stressful time and thinking, I should take a look at those college application essays. However, there are some students who are more than happy to share and get that feedback, but there are some students who do not. And so I, every year, hear from families who are going through this dynamic. Very interestingly, from the parent perspective, I hear parents who are either frustrated or concerned or worried that they're not going to get a chance to look at those essays. And then from the student's perspective, where they might have some feelings about sharing that sort of information. And so I wanted to explore this topic with you, Erin. So for those families who might be currently undergoing kind of this sort of dynamic, can you share with us what might be causing this sort of dynamic between parent and student?
That is a great question and a very broad one. So let's break it down into a couple of different elements. Number one, let's look at what you said. This college application process is a stressful time, right? Why is it stressful? There's a lot to do. There are deadlines. The kid is needing to do their schoolwork every day. And then if they play a sport or have an activity, they have to do all those things. And then on top of all that, they need to fill out applications and write essays and figure out some plan for the coming school year. So on the surface, that explains a lot of the stress that's going on, that's happening during this time of life for a student. And then the parent is kind of feeling that stress through their child. This is often the case. But if we peel back that layer just a little bit and peek under the surface of that, what we find is that this time of year, this time of life, this fall of senior year time is stressful because there's a lot of fear and uncertainty around it for both parent and child. Child, senior student, is looking at the next year as wide open, full of possibilities. Maybe it's exciting, but maybe it's completely overwhelming. All they've known is a predestined or prescribed, if they're in some kind of traditional school setting, a prescribed formula pretty much since kindergarten. You take these classes, you're in this grade, you're at this level, and maybe you have some flexibility in your electives or something like that. But pretty much every kid is doing the same thing. But then when they look forward to college, it's just wide open, or a trade school or whatever. It's wide open. There are endless possibilities, which is great, but it can be overwhelming. And that fear of the unknown, they maybe have gone to the same school with the same kids for a couple of years or their whole lives. Now they're looking at going to a different location, maybe to live. Maybe they go on campus. So now they're going to live in a different location with total strangers doing different things, different studies than they have previously. That can be really scary, which adds to the stress. And then from the parents' perspective, they have had some level of oversight, management. I don't like to say control, but I'll use that word, control, over their kids for the last 17 years. Now they're looking at sending their kid off into the giant world where they're going to have very little control, theoretically. And that's really scary for parents. So when you peel back that layer, that surface level of stress of there's a lot to do, school, extracurriculars, applying, essay writing, all that stuff, you see underneath there's a whole lot of fear. And when fear is driving our bus, it's not a good thing. It leads us to say and do things and have interactions that we really would prefer not to if we had the choice.
I think that's a helpful way in terms of framing it, is just so much unknown. And then also from the parent perspective, knowing that they may be making an investment if they're going into college, making an investment, financial investment of,
Huge.
yeah, it could be multiple six figures of potential debt for the parents or the student, or combination of both, knowing that there could be quite a bit on the line, right, regarding where that student may go, and wanting to have that level of perhaps feedback or being able to share that experience can be quite important from the parent's perspective. But I've also have noticed from the student perspective a lot of that dynamic too, like you mentioned about fear, and even just the essay writing process itself, right? So every year I work with my students to go through this whole journey of reflection and pouring their hearts onto these essays and being vulnerable and letting themselves feel and process and go through this whole exercise of understanding who they are and what do they want to become. These are not easy questions. And this is a state of such heightened vulnerability, right? Of I am just putting officially on a piece of paper thoughts I never may have articulated to anyone else. And just having that feel just so raw adds to that dynamic.
I think you're really right about that. It's a time of life where a student is being asked to really take a good, solid, deep look at their lives and what may have happened to them in their lives to bring them to the point that they are now. Maybe it's an illness, maybe it's an injury, maybe it's a loss, maybe it's a diagnosis. It could be any number of things. It could be a significant breakup. I mean, it could be anything. And when a young person is asked to write an essay, kind of saying how they got to where they are or what made them who they are today, that requires a really honest look at some things that may be a little uncomfortable to look at. And so it can be a really vulnerable time because, a school is not going to want an essay saying, I sleep 8 hours a night, every night. I eat my 16 servings of fruits and vegetables, and I have a positive outlook every day. If a student is writing something that is just surface level and overinflated and not really honest, that's not really going to increase their chances of getting accepted into the schools that they're hoping to get accepted into. And schools are looking for kids to really take a good look at their lives and try to do some introspection and figure out how they became so far who they are, which can be a vulnerable process. And so it's kind of like a push-pull, I think, for high school seniors. On one hand, if they want to get into that school, they're motivated. They know they need to be really raw and honest. And on the other hand, being raw and honest is really scary and stressful. So it's kind of a really hard place to be because they really probably would prefer not to talk about whatever it is, but they know they really kind of have to if they want to increase their chances of getting accepted. So that can be a really weird place, an uncomfortable place, I think, for a 17-year-old to be. I mean, a 17-year-old's frontal lobe isn't even fully developed yet. That's not developed until now they're saying 25 to 30 years old. And that's where judgment and reasoning and planning and thought, that's where it originates. So our kids haven't even, their identities of who they are just in the beginning phases of forming. And they're being asked to look back at their short lives and figure out how they got to where they are. So even the process can be intimidating for them.
No, all of my students I've ever worked with, whether or not they admit it to their parents or not, all of them I've encountered have always had some sense of wanting to make their families proud, wanting to make their parents proud.
Yes.
And so some of that I also see as fear of it might not be good enough in their eyes, right? So a couple of problems sometimes I see as to when I ask, why are you not comfortable with your parents seeing your essay? One is they might not think it's good enough, right? So the fear of failure from their parents, they don't want to be something that their parents are ashamed of or embarrassed of, and or it might not be good enough, even though the student feels like it's their best effort. I think I see that oftentimes as a reason why. A second reason why sometimes I see students shy away from wanting to share anything with their parents is because they might be writing about their parents in those essays. They might be writing about something that maybe happened that was to the good, or maybe that happened that made that student realize that they did not want to be in like their parent in that way, right? And so that's really hard. Or maybe the parent may have accidentally said something, did something unknowingly, and that created a ripple effect in the student's life, and they've never confronted their parent about that. And so I sometimes get caught in the middle, right? Where I understand the parent's perspective, but I also understand the student's perspective. And at times when I'm asked to strong arm the student into showing their essay to the parent, I can't, because I think that's not the right thing to do. It's deeper than just letting someone see an essay. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's so accurate. I totally agree with you. And there are so many finer points to look at in just this one aspect, right? So why might a parent desperately want to see that essay? There could be several reasons, and this is not an all-inclusive list, but maybe they're fearful that their kid's essay is not good enough and they're not going to get into the school. Maybe they're fearful that they'll get into the school, but they're not going to get a scholarship with that essay. Maybe they're continuing in the mode of helicoptering over their kids' schoolwork. And this is just a continuation of a pattern that's been going on the child's whole life. And many, many other reasons as well. But I think one of the things that naturally happens as our kids become teenagers, and I think this is important, this will be valuable to remember for those listeners whose kids are younger teens and they're not in that college writing application process. But I think it's a good reminder for the parents whose kids are knee deep in it right now as we're talking. It's natural, it's developmentally natural for kids to want to break away from their families, especially their parents, when they become teenagers. This is all developmentally part of the process of figuring out where their families end and where they begin as separate, unique individuals with their own identity. Some of their identity may be similar to and certainly informed by their parents, and some of their identity may end up being very, very different from their parents. And so this individuation that teenagers go through developmentally natural and normal. So if you find your kid trying to break away, there's no reason to be worried and fearful about that. When that starts happening and you notice it and you feel it, as painful as it might be, because, oh, remember when they were little and they just wanted to sit in my lap all the time, as kind of bittersweet as that might be, it's actually something to celebrate, because this means our child is developing along the continuum of becoming an adult. So this individuation and separation is natural. Now, that doesn't mean we just kind of go, oh, it's normal, and we don't think about it, because we still have to monitor our kids as they're growing, make sure they're making solid choices, or if they make mistakes, they don't go too far off track and get into, some unhealthy behaviors or choices or lifestyle options that there are always lurking around the corner. So we still have to monitor them, but especially once they're at senior year, if they don't want to share that essay, like you said, there could be many reasons. Maybe they wrote about their parent, maybe they haven't shared this personal information with their parent, maybe they are concerned it's not going to be good enough, maybe they're worried about their parents' reaction, all of those things. There are many reasons why a child might not want to share that essay with their parent, but it's important for the parent not to try to sneak in the back door and, peek over the child's shoulder and try to read it while they're working on it, or sneak and pull it up at night when the child is sleeping. That's not the answer, and that's not the right approach. I think it's really important I think it would be okay for a parent to have a conversation with the child. If the child is resisting sharing it with them, they can certainly ask why the child's not comfortable sharing it. And the child will either tell you honestly or not tell you. But I think the follow up to that, no matter how that conversation were to go, would be, I have confidence in you. I am cheering you on every step of the way. If you don't want me to read it and proof it and help you with it to polish it up, I can certainly get someone to help you, like Mary Grace, who would be a wonderful resource to help a young person trying to do this essay process. But I think the most important message a parent can give their child is, I believe in you, I have faith in you, and I'm here to help you in any way that I can. And whatever that looks like for you, whatever way you would like me to help you, I'm here to cheer you on and support you.
I think that message would probably be one of the most helpful things a student can hear as they're going through such a stressful time of not knowing who they are or who they want to be, and asking themselves all these questions of identity, right? Of what their futures are. Because what folks don't also sometimes realize in these essays is that these are just such deep reflections of a student coming to terms with who they are today and who they hope to be in the future. It's almost like a diary, right? Where you are telling people, and it's an admissions team whom you're never going to meet, right? So someone anonymous
Right.
to you about maybe a big failure that you're embarrassed about and how you learned from it, or maybe something that was a problem that you had to encounter. But you were mentioning earlier about, it's not always just the kind of shiny, pretty story that people are looking for. They want to understand, can you overcome challenge? Can you overcome things when they don't go your way? Because college is hard, right? Especially if you're going to a competitive program, it's not easy. And so they're looking for that resiliency. And when students are reflecting on those moments, it can be quite tough. And as you were talking, just reflecting as a parent myself. So I'm a parent of younger ones, right? 3 and 5. And so as I am going through this process with parents of older teens, I've learned so much, but it's also really tough to one day think, gosh, my child might one day tell me this is too personal for you to read, right? Because at this stage, at this age, I am involved in so much stuff, right? There are no kind of these secrets kind of thing, right? And so
Right.
knowing that in the future, they might not feel okay to share, right? So I think that would be also, I think, helpful, Erin, for you to share a little more about too, is this is way beyond, I think, just essay in this time frame, this kind of level of trust or knowing that the child has the confidence of their parents. This starts way before the application
Way.
process, right? So can you talk a little bit more about that?
I heard someone say recently, and I wish I could remember who said it, but they said, don't do for your child what your child can do for themselves. And that goes down all the way to pulling their pants on when they're toddlers and tying their shoes when they're developmentally capable of doing so at whatever age they master that. We should, as parents, from the time a child is very, very young, should constantly be practicing restraint, self-restraint, to not dive in and do for a child what they can do for themselves. I know that I personally made this mistake when my older son, who's now in college, was younger. I don't like crumbs on the counter and sticky messes. It's just my thing that I don't like. So it took me a long time to allow him to make his own peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because I didn't want to deal with the mess. And once I finally, kind of snapped out of that and realized, wait, I'm putting my own comfort level above what is developmentally good for my child. What am I doing? I mean, he was probably 7 or 8 before I let him do his own peanut butter and jelly. And I felt awful about that. I just, I held him back from that. Okay, it's one little piece, right? It's not like I ruined his life with it, but it was a great illustration to me of how I was holding him back because of my own needs, my desires, my wishes to have a clean counter. I could clean up the counter when he was done, or better yet, I could teach him how to clean up his own mess that he made to make his sandwich. That would have been a better approach. And so if we can kind of remember that at every step of the way, let my child do what they can do. Don't do it for them. Let them learn how to make dinner. Let them learn how to clean the bathroom and clean the toilet. Don't worry about the germs on their hands. They can wash their hands. Let them learn how to do laundry. Let them learn how to do all of these things when it's developmentally the right time for your child. Kids develop at different rates. But if you're always kind of mindful of that as they grow, then this growing into teenage years, growing through high school, growing into the post-high school years will be a smoother transition because at every step along the way, you were mindfully trying to give them as much freedom and responsibility as they were developmentally ready to handle. That's the ideal. If you are still making your child's peanut butter and jelly when they're 15 years old, and when they're 16 years old, they've never even boiled a pot of water, and when they're 17 years old, they've never done a load of laundry, then when you send them off to college that August, it's going to be a wicked transition for them. They're not going to know how to do their laundry. They're not going to know how to make pasta. They're not going to know how to manage money or how to do any of this because you were doing it for them all along. That will make the transition hard for them, painful for you. It's just not something you should strive for. So if your kids are younger, I would say, well, for you, certainly your kids are younger, but for your listeners, if your kids are not yet seniors, take this opportunity after hearing this conversation to take a real honest look at all of the things that an adult needs to be able to do and ask yourself which of those things your child is developmentally capable of doing, and have you given them that responsibility? And if not, it might be time to really start adding some new opportunities for your child, because I think that's the best way to make the transition to college as smooth as it can be. I mean, it's a transition. You're never going to get past that. It's not going to be easy peasy, but it can certainly be easier or it can be more difficult.
So interesting, because that also manifests, I think, in different ways throughout the college application process too, that I can sometimes see, especially if a student didn't start working with me at a younger age and we start as their seniors. And things like asking the student to look up some information regarding their desired major. Some students will come up and say, how do I actually find that information on a website? Right. And things that you think are pretty
Wow.
self-explanatory, or things like how to use a schedule, right? Because that's a big thing when I'm working with my students, is how do you actually budget your time, hold yourself accountable. And some students have everything in their brain. They don't have a way to budget their time, and they just are trying to memorize these checklists. And when I ask them, show me a paper calendar or digital calendar, however way you want to schedule it. And sometimes I'll see like, this essay will take 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, 30 minutes here. And it's not realistic at all, right? So even thinking through, how long did it take you to write that outline before? How long did it take you to write that draft? Now look at your schedule. Will that actually fit, right? So things like that, that I think oftentimes as adults, we take it for granted as obvious, aren't that obvious to our students sometimes, who haven't had that opportunity to do that themselves, right? And so it's just quite fascinating where that sort of skills that we think might be quote unquote easy, if they don't get that chance to practice that at a younger age, when they're in college, they're going to feel even more lost about what do I do? What do I eat? What's my schedule like? How do I manage sleeping on time, right? All these different things where now there's all this independence, can be quite a challenge. So I think I agree with you. There's definitely that independence and being able to foster that, so that later on, when students are going through the application process, there's some confidence there that the student will ask the right questions, know the right pieces. And then I also think, Erin, there's this element of trust, right? Open communication, and students feeling safe, even having some of these conversations with their parents. Maybe they wanted to talk to them about whatever they're writing about, but they didn't or haven't. Any thoughts there around keeping lines of communication open even before the whole college application process even begins?
Yes, I will never forget when one of my older son's friends said to me in middle school, I don't tell my mom anything because she freaks out. And knowing this mom, he's 100% right. And so he was missing out. Sadly, he was missing out on all the wisdom and the life experience and the guidance that his mom desperately wanted to offer him and that he could benefit from, because he didn't want to deal with her overreaction when she found out about whatever things. And so from that, I started telling my clients that, or encouraging my clients to work on their poker face. So I think it's really important for parents to, again, exercise restraint, practice restraint. If your child comes to you and tells you something upsetting or shocking or something you really don't like, maybe they tried drinking, maybe they failed their test, maybe they got detention at school, whatever. It could be anything, and it could be any age. If your reaction is immediately, ah, the odds of them telling you something the next time, they have just gone down dramatically. If instead you listen to what they have to say, work on that poker face, take a deep breath, maybe just say, I am kind of surprised to hear this. I'm kind of disappointed, depending on what it is. I think I really need some time to think about this before we talk any further about this, because I kind of really need to wrap my head around it and just be very calm about it. And then when you feel ready to go back and talk about it, then go back and talk about it. But if we immediately want to react in the heat of the moment when our emotions are probably running high, then we're really closing that door of communication. We're not opening it. We're not making it a free flowing exchange, we're just really squeezing that door shut. And if we can try to not overreact, take the time we need to digest the information that we've just found out about it, whether our child told us or whether we found out about it from someone else or what have you, really try to be standing solidly on 2 feet and have our heads wrapped around it before we discuss it with our child. That is probably one of the most subtle yet powerful and effective ways to keep those lines of communication open.
I love that because it then helps build the habit and practice of very thoughtful communication versus angry communication that can sometimes happen. I in the medical world, I also worked in the medical world. I remember speaking to a physician who mentioned that this was part of their training as well. No matter what a patient were to say, to practice a neutral face. And the number one thing was do not raise your eyebrows. So no matter what it was, keep your eyebrows stationary.
Interesting. Interesting.
I had never forgot. That was very early in my career. And a physician shared that with me, that that was something very difficult for her working in the field she was in, that she had to practice over and again. Do not raise your eyebrows. Do not raise your eyebrows.
Interesting.
Because it creates this notion of embarrassment of, and if like you mentioned, you know, that you've triggered a response where you're going to be yelled at, you're going to be in trouble. Yes, you might still get in trouble, but at least it's a open and supportive environment versus one of complete fear, and being able to learn not to respond with the eyebrows raised or the condescending really or the condescending why, right? Those can make such a difference, even if the intention of the parent is not to necessarily be condescending. It's just sometimes a natural reaction that can occur without even thinking about it, that can send just ripple effects on the child that later manifest into things like the student not wanting to share an essay because they do not want to induce that sort of reaction.
Definitely. I mean, what I'm about to say is a topic for a whole different conversation, but if I can try to say it in a condensed nutshell, when my older son, he likes to joke that he's our experiment since we tried all the things on him and kept the ones that work and changed the ones that didn't. But when he was growing up, when he was very young, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I thought I had it all together, but of course I didn't. And so I used timeout. I used punishment. I took away his video games. I grounded him from his friends. All the stuff, all the traditional stuff that you hear that you're supposed to be doing. And when he was about 7 or 8 years old, we started catching him lying repeatedly. He would be that kid with powder around his mouth in a ring, and you would say, "Did you eat a donut?" "No, I didn't eat a donut." And the evidence is all over his face.
Yeah.
So when we started seeing this pattern developing, we started getting very concerned. Are we raising a pathological liar? What is going on here? So our first fear rose up, and we thought, there's something wrong with our child. He needs to be fixed. There's something wrong with him. And then in the process of my transformation in parenting, and thank goodness I did for my own life, family and life, but also for the benefit of the people that I work with, I transformed the way I showed up as a parent. I got rid of the timeouts and the grounding and taking away video games and all that stuff. And I learned what real natural consequences look like. And I learned about healthy boundaries, and I started looking at the way we handled things, and did we use healthy boundaries, and where could we be flexible, and where did we really need to be firm with our boundaries. And so this transformation completely eliminated his lying behavior. It was over a few years because it took me time to figure it out, and because I was learning how to be a new parent in the process. But he, as a college freshman last year, I remember one time, and this is just the normal pattern for him now. He got a parking ticket, a $25 parking ticket. And what did he do? He called me on the phone and he said, Mom, I got a parking ticket. And I didn't freak out. I just said, oh, well, how did you get a ticket? What did you do? And he said, it was one of the first times we allowed him to take his car up in the second semester. So it was one of the first days he was parking. And he parked in a place where I think you're allowed to park there on the weekend, but then you have to move the car Sunday night because it's got to be open for visitors the next day or something like that. But anyway, so he did not know the ins and outs of the parking rules and regulations, and he left it beyond when he was allowed to, when he should have moved it. And so he got a ticket. And he explained the situation to me. And I just said, oh, well, that I could see how you didn't understand that, but I bet you won't make that mistake again. And then now you know to be more careful about where you park. And as you start driving more, you'll learn the places you can park and where you can't, when you have to move your car and when you can leave it. And it led to a very fruitful conversation. But if I was still in that old mode of punishing him or freaking out or yelling at him or something, there's no way he would have told me he got a ticket. He would have paid that $25. I never would have known about it. And it would have prevented me from having a really fruitful conversation about what it's like to be a driver and be responsible for a car in a place where you don't have a driveway like at home. You have to be responsible with where you park your car. He would have missed that conversation.
And having just that ability then to have that level of comfort, that trust, and some of it's just the intrinsic motivation, right? So it's not trying to please someone else, please your parents. Right. This is therefore why I'm doing whatever I'm doing, but having more of an intrinsic motivation of I would like to share this with my parents, and here's why for myself, right? Having that, I think over time is important, especially as students are transitioning from teen years, high school years into college years and fostering this independence. It's so tough because I think as parents, we may want to save our kids from all the problems and save them from all the mistakes. And so much learning comes from those mistakes, right? Those deeper learnings, those deeper lessons necessitate sometimes actually living through some of those mistakes. And so that's so powerful. So Erin, as some parents may be going through this right now, this moment, at the time of this broadcast, we are right in the swing of college applications, very heightened stakes on the line. We're just emerging from a pandemic to add things already to such a stressful situation. What might you say to those parents who are at that heightened level of stress, who might be really struggling with trying to figure out how to navigate this dynamic with a child who might not want to be so open about their college process?
A couple of things come to mind. Number one, try to notice when fear is driving the bus. When fear is driving the bus, before you address the issue that the fear is coming up over, address the fear first. Don't try to interact with your child when fear is in charge, because it's not going to go well. Soothe your own fear before you deal with the issue that's causing the fear, or that's triggered the fear. So I think it's important to remember we might have our own ideas of what we want for our child. We want them to get into this college or get that scholarship or this, that, or the other. But I really do think that there's so much weight and emphasis put on this college process, like it is the be all end all of everything. And it's just not, because your child might go through all of this stress and work and hassle and effort and everything and get into the college of their dreams. And they might end up wanting to transfer a year later because they don't like it. And there's no way to predict it. So what I would encourage parents to try to remember is encourage your children, support your children, have a hopeful spirit about it, but just know it's not the end of the world. They don't need to sign their name in blood. They're not, this is not a life sentence that they're trying to commit to. If they like it and they do well where they go, great. Hopefully they can stay there. If they don't like it, they can change. If they start with this major and realize they hate it, they can change. Like you switched your major a bunch of times, I know. And so it's totally fine. You don't have to be, there's nothing written in stone anywhere for any reason when it comes to college. And maybe your child ends up not being quite mature enough and ready to live on campus at some 4-year school a couple of states away. Maybe they need an extra year to mature. Maybe they just need to go to community college. And that's not the end of the world. And if your friends judge you over it, who cares? That's just shallow. Don't worry about what other parents might think or might say or whatever. What matters is that your child finds their path, finds the thing that lights them up, that makes them excited to get out of bed in the morning and contribute something to the world. That's what really matters. Whether it happens in a trade school, whether it happens in opening their own business or a community college or an Ivy League school or anything in between, it doesn't matter. As long as your child finds what they love to do, then whatever path gets them to that, that's what we need to focus on. That's what I would say.
That is so powerful. What I oftentimes remind families during this particular season is that for many families, this might be the last year of life as you know it the way it is. Because if your child decides to go to a college where they are moving away, it will never be the same ever again, right? It'll maybe if they do come back because of housing purposes, they get a job nearby, whatever it might be, you might be helping them transition to right before they get their own place, whatever it might be. But whatever the dynamic is, senior year is the last kind of piece of childhood, really. And knowing that, don't you want to have some joy during that time, right? Yes, it is stressful. I acknowledge that. And it's also a time as well for students to be able to enjoy their senior year, enjoy their friends, enjoy an opportunity to be home and to enjoy their families as well. And so sometimes we can lose sight of that importance of, like you mentioned, letting students become who they are at the timeline that they need, at the same time also allowing for some of that joy to exist at that period of time can be quite hard. Another thing too, when with these families particularly who are struggling with this, I sometimes, like I mentioned, caught in the middle, and I ask my students whether or not they would be willing to share. I ask them, are you willing to let your parents know the reason why you may not be sharing whatever it is that you don't want to share? And I turn to the parent and say, and I speak to them separately. Are you willing to hear the reason? Are you willing to hear the reason without getting upset and accepting what they might be sharing, and to not kind of shame them for whatever it is that they're feeling, because it's what they're feeling, right? Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, it doesn't really matter. It's what they feel. And being able to have that sort of communication is so important, so valuable during this time frame. And so I really love how you framed it around letting the student be who they are, letting the student figure it out. And then also for parents to be mindful of kind of where are they coming from? What lens and what mindset might they be coming from entering these conversations?
And I think this pandemic has been the perfect illustration of why it's so important to support our kids to figure out who it is they're supposed to be, who they're meant to be. Because how many people have quit their jobs, changed their careers, bought an RV and traveled around to campgrounds because they can't be around people because of the pandemic, whatever. But how many people have had a sometimes rude awakening in the past year and a half because they realized that their lives, their existence is nothing like they wanted it to be. They're maybe overstressed, overworked. They're in a career that doesn't fulfill them. They might be making money, but what's it all for at the end of the day? What does it matter? People have made some drastic changes in their lives. And a lot of that has been for the better because they've been awakened to what it's all about anyway. And so if we can support our kids to figure out who it is they're naturally supposed to be, who they're meant to be as they're becoming adults, will help them hopefully avoid this rude awakening at some point where they realize, what have I just done for the last 20 years of my life? It's nothing. It doesn't nourish me. It doesn't feed my soul. So we have a great opportunity as parents to help our kids find their track now rather than letting them have the midlife crisis in 20 years.
And what a privilege, right? To be able to have that choice and to allow students and families to be able to explore that, because exactly that is sometimes the jobs we think are the most honorable. Someone might hate it, right? They might not
Right.
want to be a doctor, right? It is a hard job and maybe it's not what people want to do. And oftentimes when I have encountered students who are writing about wanting to be a doctor, and I can feel it in their essay that that's not actually what they want. When I ask them why, they say, well, my parents actually want me to be a doctor. I don't, right? And I think that for me is unfortunately tragic because
Painful.
yeah, it's so hard because I understand they're wanting to please their parents, right? And I get it. And at the same time, that is a very hard road and burden to take on, knowing that that's not what sparks your joy.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, I thank you so much for exploring this conversation with me. It's a tough topic. I know that families are going through this now, are struggling with this. And so I'm very grateful that you're sharing these tips with them. If there are families who'd like to learn more about your services, where should they go?
They can just go to my website, which is basically my name, erin-taylor.com. And on the homepage, they can get my free offering, which is a webinar on why does my child act that way, so that they can start to understand the roots of some of their kids' behavior. And it might also help them to start to see some of the roots of their behavior too.
Oh, very relevant to this conversation. So for those of you who are watching, let us know in the comments, what is your biggest takeaway? And if you have successfully created a relationship with your child, where there is that open communication, leave your best tip in the comments below so that other parents can learn from you as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Bye.